Today's presentation will be regarding reporting of attendance hours for FY21 and how to report the calendar for the same fiscal year. My name is Tammy Lehman. I am Coordinator of School Finance. The topics will include talking about on-site instruction, other non-traditional methods of instruction, alternative method of instruction AMI, virtual instruction. Then I will go over the board rule that applies to the 2021 fiscal year, which includes alternative method of instruction extended, or AMIX, distance instruction, fixed blended instruction, intermittent instruction, instruction during quarantine. Then I will go over various attendance reporting scenarios, then the calendar reporting for FY21, and I will talk a little bit about summer school paid for with relief funds and reporting of that data. First, I will talk about on-site instruction. So on-site instruction is our typical instruction that districts and charter schools have done in the past, and that's where students are physically present on site and are under the guidance and direction of teachers in the teaching process. Just a reminder that no person without a valid Missouri teaching certificate shall engage in the practice of teaching or the performance of education duties in grades kindergarten through 12 in any public school in the state. A valid Missouri certificate includes a substitute certificate for attendance hour reporting. Remember, per some federal requirements, a substitute certificate is not considered appropriate certification and would disallow individuals from being paid with federal funds. So if you have questions regarding any of that and the federal funds somebody is being paid with, you would need to talk to the appropriate section here at DESE who pays those funds to you regarding any questions you have on proper certification that would allow the person to be paid with federal funds. But for claiming of attendance hours, at minimum, a substitute certificate must be held by the individual. An LEA must collect attendance and absent hours in a consistent manner. There are basically two methods in which an LEA could collect attendance and absent hours. Attendance and absent hours can be collected by the minute. This is the most accurate method of collecting attendance and absent hours. Attendance and absent hours can also be collected by the hour. When an LEA is using this method of collection, the LEA must consistently apply the same methodology to the collection of attendance as well as absent hours. For example, if attendance was taken at the beginning of class, all present are in attendance, and if a student walks in several minutes after attendance is taken, then they would be absent the entire class. Same thing would be if you took attendance in the middle of a class. All who were present at that time would be present for the entire period. Anyone not present would then be absent, even if they left a couple minutes prior to that or walked in several minutes after that, they would be absent then the entire period. Alternative method of instruction. Beginning in school year 2021, statute was changed to allow for districts and charter schools to use the alternative method of instruction on a day when school is lost or canceled due to an exceptional or emergency circumstance. So first of all, to do this, the LEA must have a DESE-approved AMI plan each year where you apply for that plan on how, and it discusses how you will provide instruction during the time you would have called school off and then the manner in which you will collect the assignments for claiming of attendance. You can only use this for up to 36 hours during the school year. It is not 6 days, it is 36 hours. So it may be that if you were to use this for a full standard day length, you will end up with a partial day of AMI, or you will not be able to use all of the 36 hours. So that is a district local decision, how you work that, but it is capped at 36 hours. And again, it is only allowed to be used on the day in which school is lost or canceled due to the exceptional or emergency circumstance. AMI hours are considered hours of instruction. There is no allowance to pivot to distance instruction. AMI is different than the AMIX. AMIX was for a COVID-related reason. That is only allowed for the 2021 year, as I will discuss later in this presentation. And again, you're only allowed up to 36 hours of AMI. So you are allowed to call school off for a day for on-site instruction, but do the AMI. But it's not something you just get to do for any reason. It has to be where you called off school due to an emergency circumstance. And these hours are considered hours of instruction. Attendance hours can only be claimed for the classes in which the students completed the pre-described lessons in the time frame and manner that was approved within the AMI plan. So what that means is just because you had AMI that day does not mean students are in attendance 100% for that day. They actually have to complete the assignment for their class to be counted as attendance. So on the screen is just an example of some classes, and where, for example, in my example here, the student completed 6 of the assignments of the 7 assignments they had to do, and so they did not complete their English assignment. So they would be absent for the English period, but they would be able to be counted present for the remaining courses in which they did complete and turn in the assignment in the time frame that was approved within your AMI plan. And just to reiterate, AMI is permanent in statute. That is something going forward you are still allowed to use during those times in which you would have called school off due to the emergency circumstance. So now let's discuss virtual instruction. Again, so far everything I'm discussing is items that are in statute and have always been allowed. Virtual instruction is when students receive all instruction or some of their instruction through a technology-based delivery method that meets the requirements of Section 161.670 and or 162.1250. So 161.670 is the statute regarding MOCAP. 162.1250 is the more generic law. And so virtual courses can be a MOCAP course. It can be a LEA developed course, or it could be a commercial course approved by the LEA. Virtual courses can be synchronous or they can be asynchronous as far as the instruction being provided. Attendance for a virtual course is taken off-site is claimed based upon course completion. The law talks about 2 components of course completion. There is a 50% completion component and 100% completion component. Attendance hours are based on the attendance possible for such class delivered in a non-virtual program in the student's resident, district, or charter school. Virtual courses, 162.1250 at 50% completion, then you can claim 47% of each course's possible on-site hours. 100% completion is 94% of each course's possible on-site hours. And this is for courses that qualify as 162.1250 courses. Then MOCAP courses, which is the 161.670, at 50% completion, you're claiming 47% of each course's on-site possible hours. 100% completion, you're claiming 94% of each course's possible on-site hours, and an A+ eligible student at 100% completion can qualify for 5% of each course's possible on-site hours. Now, as I explain this, many people want to say that at 50% completion, you're claiming 94% of 50% of the hours, and that is simply not the case. The law states at 50% completion, it's 47% of each course's possible on-site hours. And semester 1's hours may be different than semester 2 hours, and so you do need to look at it as to the complete year's hours of how long it would take to complete that course, and it is at 50% completion, 47% of that full year hours, not just one semester's worth of hours. So take that into consideration when you're doing your calculations. District and charter schools should have an internal A+ policy and appeal process that could be taken into consideration special circumstances such as these for A+ qualifications. This policy and process does not change the attendance hours reported to DESE for students taking non-MOCAP courses. So only if it's a MOCAP course is there an allowance to claim 95% for an A+ eligible student. If it is not a MOCAP course, law specifically limits it to 94%. That's where the district or charter school should have that internal A+ policy to help with have an appeals process for A+ eligible candidates. If a student has less than 50% completion, then there is 0 of the 47% of each course's possible hours. So if they do not reach a component of course completion, there is no attendance hours that can be claimed. Greater than 50%, but less than 100% course completion, you are still limited to claiming only 47% of each course's on-site possible hours. Course completion is defined at the LEA level. Any questions regarding virtual courses should be addressed to our virtual course section here at DESE, which is part of Office of Quality Schools. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the special board rule that was passed that allowed for special attendance claiming purposes only for FY21 for COVID-related reasons. So on July 7th of 2020, the State Board of Education passed a board rule to allow LEAs to implement unique schedules and patterns of instruction due to COVID-19. The rule described the method for claiming attendance hours during these unique schedules and patterns of instruction. This is valid only for FY21. It is set to expire July 31st of 2021. What this means is for this next school year, meaning FY22, there is no allowance for distance instruction. Instruction must be given to students per statute, and that would be either on-site instruction or your virtual instruction per the statutes that I have discussed earlier. So on-site instruction, as defined by the board rule, were students who are physically present at school under the guidance and direction of teachers in the teaching process. Virtual instruction, our students receive all instruction through a technology-based delivery that meets the requirements of Section 161.670 and or 162.1250. Board rule then created and defined what distance instruction was. This is where it's outside of normal statutory allowances. Students are off-site and they receive instruction through online means or through the use of physical materials. Instruction includes teacher interaction as approved by the department in the LEA's AMIX plan. So to implement distance instruction, the LEA would have applied to DESE and would have implemented an AMIX plan to allow for instruction to be done in this more distanced manner. Distance instruction is made up of two different types of instruction: fixed blended instruction, which is where students receive instruction under a planned pattern of on-site and distance instruction. That includes a minimum equivalent of 2 full days on-site of instruction per week. For the purposes of this rule, fixed blended calendars are designed to support social distancing. So this could be where the LEA did, for example, AB days, where students were on-site, a certain set of students were on-site maybe Mondays and Wednesdays, and another set of students maybe Thursdays and Fridays, or however, whatever combination your LEA came up with for distance instruction, but it was there to support social distancing, so there was less students on-site. Another component of distance instruction was intermittent blended instruction. Students in an entire school building or LEA receive distance instruction during a period of interrupted to the planned pattern. The planned pattern of on-site or fixed blended instruction is interrupted by local conditions that prevent on-site instruction. So this could be that in your area, there were high levels of COVID cases, and so for that grade level or building or the entire LEA, there was no on-site instruction. And all learning was done in a distance manner. That is all considered distance instruction. Then another component of distance instruction was instruction during quarantine, where an individual student or group of students, such as a classroom, bus roster, received distance instruction for an identified period of time to protect public health. So when students were placed under quarantine by a local or county health official or the district acting in their behalf, the students were receiving distance instruction. That time was considered instruction during quarantine and considered distance instruction. Now, I will go into a little bit more in depth on distance instruction. To provide distance instruction, the LEA must have a department-approved AMIX plan. Again, this was only good for fiscal year 21, distance instruction was only allowed during periods of fixed blended, intermittent instruction, or instruction during quarantine. Attendance hours for distance instructional time is based on each individual student's average on-site attendance rate. Distance instructional time must be tracked by the LEA to allow attendance and absent hours to be calculated at the end of the year. On the slide are some examples of distance instruction in combination with other types of instruction. So I have a variety of scenarios on the screen. These could be either at one LEA in different grade levels or buildings, or it could be considered at different LEAs. They are just simple examples of different things that have occurred throughout the state with various LEAs. So in scenario A, the student has a total calendar of 1,090 hours. This student was on site the entire year. The student was present for 1,013 hours and they were absent for 77. That gave this student a 92.93 attendance percentage and absent rate of 7.06. The student was never provided any distance instruction time. They were never placed on quarantine, and their district or LEA or grade level grouping was never in a pattern of fixed blended instruction or intermittent instruction. And so their attendance is strictly based on on-site attendance. In scenario B, this student had a combination of distance instruction and on-site instruction. So on-site, they had a total of 984 hours, 885 were attendance hours, 99 were absent hours. So that gave the student 89.93% attendance, 10.06 absent hours. They were under quarantine for 60 hours. So this student was placed in quarantine and provided distance instruction for 60 hours during the school year. So then to calculate the attendance for distance instructional time, you take that 60 times the on-site attendance rate of 89.93 to get a total of distance instructional hours of 53.9580, and then you take the 60 times the absent attendance percentage of 10.06 to come up with 6.0420. So the attendance hours reported would be the 885 plus the 53.9580 absent hours reported at the end of the year. And when I say reported, that would all be part of the June enrollment and attendance file, but the absent hours would be the 99 hours plus the 6.0420. So in scenario C, we have a student who had some on-site time of only 277 hours. For that time, they had 220 hours present and 55 hours absent, so that's a total attendance percentage of 80.14 and absent hours of 19.86. This student had a couple different scenarios happen to them. So for a while, their school district had fixed blended instruction for their grade level grouping or building. And so they were 276 hours of distance instruction during a fixed blended pattern. Then there was a period of time where the school district or LEA had to be completely distance learning due to COVID in that area for this particular student's building or grade level grouping, and that total was 553. So this student had a total of 277 on-site hours and 829 distance instructional hours. So then we have to take that attendance percentage and absent percentage for on-site to then calculate the attendance hours to claim for the distance instructional time. So you would take the 829 times the 80.14 to equal 664.3606. You would then take the 829 times the 19.86 to equal 164.6390. And then the attendance hours reported in the June enrollment and attendance file would be the on-site hours of 222 plus the distance instructional time of calculated attendance hours of 664.3606. And then the absent hours reported would be the 555 plus the 164.6394. In our last scenario, we have a student whose grade level grouping or building was on site for only 215 times. or 215 hours, I'm sorry. So this student in their particular scenario had 209 attendance hours and 6 absent hours. So this student had a pretty great attendance percentage of 97.21 and an absent percentage of 2.79. This student, then their LEA for that particular building and grade level, then had a fixed blended instructional pattern for 795 hours during the year. And this particular student also was unfortunately quarantined for 50 hours. And so there's a total of 845 total distance instructional hours. And again, to calculate the distance instructional attendance hours, you take the 845 times the student's 97.21% of attendance to equal 821.4245, and then the 845 times the 2.79 to equal the 23.5755 absent hours, and then reported in the June enrollment and attendance file would be the 821.4245 plus the on-site attendance hours of 209. Then for absent hours, you would take the 23.5755 plus the on-site attendance hours of 6 hours. And on the bottom of the slide, the calculations I basically said out loud is kind of shown to you. So I just was discussing different methods of calculating attendance hours when students had distance instruction and on-site instruction. And this slide here is going to go a little bit more in depth on how to calculate attendance when there was virtual attendance for part of the year or for the whole year for a student. So for the scenario E, so let's say the first semester, this student was virtual the whole time, they started virtual, and they ended virtual. Well, the attendance is going to be calculated out at the end of the year because you have to, again, know the number of attendance hours it would have taken to complete that course on site in a non-virtual environment at the resident district. So you cannot calculate anything with this course until the end of the year. You know, semester one's hours are not going to be the same as semester two hours, especially when you talk about having weather and other things that occur typically in the spring of the year. So you can do nothing until the end of the year, but this student completed the course. So we're going to say they had a component of course completion at the first semester. So at this point, they're at 50% course completion. Then this student went into the second semester where they started virtual and they ended virtual. So this student was virtual the entire year. They've completed the course, so they have 100% course completion. So 94% of the attendance hours it would have taken to complete the course on site. In my example here, we're just assuming this student took the same number of courses that an on-site student took or had the ability to do so. So the final calendar for this particular student's building and grade level was 1,080. So then you take 94% of that to equal the attendance hours of 1,015.2 and absent hours of 64.8. And that is what you would report in the June enrollment and attendance file. In scenario F, for first semester, a student started virtually and then they ended virtually. So they have a component of course completion, but again, we have to calculate that at the end of the year. So then for semester two, let's say the student started virtually, but at the end of the second semester, this student had exited the district. So this student here, either when I use the term exit in this particular slide, it can be that the student truly exited the district, they transferred out, went somewhere else, or it can also mean that student did not meet that second component of course completion. So in this case, this student only had 50% course completion, and their particular LEA, that particular grade level and building they're in, had a calendar of 1,100 hours. Because they only reached 50% course completion, then you take 47% of the on-site time. So in this case, it would be 517 hours would be reported as attendance, and 583 would be absent hours. Or if the student really exited the district prior to the end, those absent hours may be a little bit less than what I've calculated here because they truly exited the district. But what really matters is those attendance hours reported of 517 cannot be any higher than that because that's the 47% of the year-long course. In my scenario F here, we have a student who started the semester virtual, but it wasn't working out for them, so they transferred to on-site. So they ended the first semester on-site. So basically now what's happening is the hours are based upon the on-site attendance rate and absent rate for the year. So what originally was virtual, we're now basically changing it to distance instructional time. So basically how they end the semester is how you can claim it. So the whole time for that whole semester is going to be considered on-site, and the time where they were doing the virtual course off-site, you're now converting that to be distance instructional hours. So then let's say the second semester in this scenario, the student was on-site the entire time. And so this particular student had a 96.5% attendance rate, and they had a 3.5% absent rate. So basically, for this whole time period, for this student's particular grade level and building, this calendar was 1,044. So their attendance hours for the year is going to be based, you had their on-site time, and then the time that was converted to distance instruction, you multiply it as shown in the prior slide by this attendance and absent rate, and you add it together. And so in the June enrollment and attendance file, you would show 1,007.46 attendance hours and 36.54 absent hours. And again, you would reference the prior slide to help with the calculation of the on-site distance instructional hours to then be applied to the on-site hours otherwise for this scenario. In scenario G, we have a student who started on-site, and then they decided, nope, I'm going to switch to virtual. So they ended the first semester virtual. So again, how they ended that semester is how you can treat that attendance. And so you can treat this whole first semester as virtual. Then in the second semester, this student started virtually again, but something wasn't working out very well, so they ended up back on site again. And so how they ended the second semester is basically how you can treat the second semester. And so it's going to be on-site attendance. So for all the time that this student was on-site for the year, they had a 90.75% attendance rate and a 9.25 absent rate. So basically, the first semester, because they ended virtually, you can claim 50% or 47% of the on-site attendance hours for the virtual courses they took. Because they reached that component of course completion in this example, they did reach that 50% mark. Then for the second semester, they ended on-site. And so for just the second semester hours, the time that they were virtual now becomes distance instruction. So you've got to figure out, using our method described in the previous slide, what the attendance hours would be for that portion of time for the second semester. And so you would take those now distance instructional hours. Now, not anything virtual from the first semester, because first semester you're claiming based upon course completion. So when we talk about distance instruction, we're talking about just the second semester's calculation and what hours were marked distance instruction time there, and you're timesing that by the 90.75 for the attendance hours and the 9.25 for absent hours. And so, and then you come up with the attendance hours you would then report in the June enrollment and attendance file. So in our last scenario is a student who started the year virtually in semester 1, but at some point they exited the district. Either they didn't reach course completion or they completely exited the district, so they did not reach a component of course completion for semester 1. In semester 2, I'm using the same terms here again, where they exited, so they could either have completely exited the district or they did not reach another component of course completion. So for this child, there is no attendance hours that can be claimed for this student because they did not reach a component of course completion. And I know this is a lot of information on these past two slides that I just discussed. Hopefully, if you sit down and look at them, they will make sense to you. So I'm going to go over some common attendance scenarios that we have been asked throughout the year. And some of this I have discussed, but the first one is students switching between virtual instruction per 162.1250 or 161.670, and on-site instruction. So when a student switches between substantially similar coursework, how the student ends the course is how hours will be claimed. And I kind of discussed this on the previous slide. So if the student ends the semester on site, the off-site original virtual time now becomes distance instructional time, and attendance hours is claimed as described on slide 28. If the student ends the semester off-site, enrolled in a virtual course, attendance is claimed based upon course completion. The next scenario is if a student is enrolled in a virtual instruction per 162.1250 or 161.670, transfers out of the LEA prior to reaching a component of course completion, then no attendance hours can be claimed. So see the virtual attendance claiming as described on slides 13 through 17. The entire LEA, a building within the LEA, or grade level within the LEA completed the entire semester with distance instruction. Attendance can be reported in one of two ways. If the coursework meets the requirements for virtual instruction under 162.1250, attendance may be calculated for the semester based upon course completion as described in slides 13 through 17. The LEA could also choose to have this time claimed as distance instruction, and attendance will be based on the average on-site attendance rate of each individual student as described in slides 27 through 29. Now, this is not a per student choice. This is what the grade level grouping of the student, what it is. So this is not an individual student thing here. If your entire building, the entire LEA, or the entire grade level within the LEA completed the semester in this manner, you will apply this to all students in that grouping. It is, again, not something you can choose by individual student. If the coursework does not meet statutory requirements for virtual instruction, attendance will then be based on average on-site attendance rate of each individual student as described on slides 27 through 29. A student enrolled in the LEA, the entire LEA, a building within the LEA, or grade level within the LEA in which the student was enrolled has been provided distance instruction and transfers from the LEA prior to having on-site instruction. Or basically there are no attendance hours that can then be claimed for the student. Student is enrolled in the LEA, and the entire LEA, a building within the LEA, or grade level within the LEA in which the student was enrolled has been provided distance instruction but transitions to on-site instruction. The student chooses to remain learning distantly. Instruction provided must meet the definition of a virtual instruction per 162.1250, and based upon course completion, attendance is then claimed based upon course completion as described on slides 13 through 17. If instruction does not meet the definition of virtual instruction, then no attendance hours can be claimed. Student is enrolled at the LEA and is scheduled to attend on-site. Student chooses to stay home but can video into the classroom. The student is absent. There is no allowance outside of current statute for virtual courses or state board rule to allow students for whom should be counted present when they otherwise should be on site. So if a student is scheduled to be on site per their pattern of instruction, they must be on site or they are absent. Unless the student qualified due to quarantine or something else, which falls under different scenarios. This is a student or parent choice to stay home. This is not a student being placed on quarantine. This is strictly per the student's schedule. They should be attending on site. Then they are going to have to be absent for this time. It would be an LEA choice whether the student was allowed to turn in assignments or to video in the classroom, but there is no allowance to claim that student for attendance hours if they just so choose to stay home. A student is quarantined by a local or county health official or the LEA acting on their behalf. The student can be provided distance instruction for the LEA's department-approved AMIX plan. The other choice was for the student to be provided homebound instruction. For homebound instruction, 5 hours of one-on-one instruction must be provided in a Sunday through Saturday time period. It can be done through electronic methods or by phone. There is an allowance under homebound instruction that if the student video directly into the classroom while the teacher is teaching other students and participates in the class, that then you could take on-site attendance. So videoing into the classroom for 5 hours does not allow the student to be claimed in 100% attendance, but you are allowed to let the student video into the classroom and then be taken and count attendance for on-site attendance. But this is only allowed only if the student qualifies for homebound instruction. Videoing into the classroom is not allowed for any other situation, unless that instruction qualified as your distance instruction or something, which is not part of this question. This particular question here, it really boils down to a student placed on quarantine, and you said you're going to provide homebound instruction. Basically, if they qualify for homebound instruction because they were placed on quarantine, and so then you can allow them to video into the classroom and take on-site attendance. But that, again, that does not count as 5 hours of one-on-one. 5 hours of one-on-one is completely separate, and again, it's one-on-one. It's not where they're videoing into a classroom with a group of students. A student is enrolled at the LEA and is quarantined, but able to engage in an instructional program. So again, attendance can only be claimed if the student qualifies and is provided services through homebound instruction. So see slide 38 that I just discussed, or that student is provided distance instruction consistent with the LEA's department-approved AMIX plan. Student is enrolled in the LEA and the entire LEA, a building within the LEA, or the grade level within the LEA in which the student is now provided on-site instruction. The parent chooses to keep their child home and continue to have their child be provided distance instruction. And I kind of discussed this earlier, but distance instruction would need to meet the requirements of virtual instruction under 162.1250 for attendance hours to be claimed. A pre-kindergarten student was provided virtual instruction. Unfortunately, virtual instruction per I got a typo here, 162.1250 or 161.670 RSMO is not allowed for pre-K. Distance instruction can be provided per the LEA's department-approved AMIX plan, and attendance is then claimed as described in slides 27 through 29. I'm going to change subjects a little bit, and I'm going to talk just a little bit about calendar reporting for FY21. So total days reported on screen 10 will include AMI days, which are those days that you called off school for an exceptional or emergency circumstance, but provided some type of alternative method of instruction. It should also include AMIX days, which are those distance instructional days. So your total calendar are basically the total days instruction was provided, whether those were on-site or off-site, total days instruction was provided. Then the total hours are the same thing. It's the total hours where instruction was provided, either through AMI or AMIX. And then virtual instruction is based on the time it would take to complete a course at the LEA in a non-virtual environment. So even if you were virtual all year, you must have a compliant calendar, and you must know how much hours it would have taken to complete the course on site at the LEA. And courses could have different times depending on your calendar. I'm going to go over a couple things with relief funds now. So summer school. So this summer, if you have a summer school, you are allowed to use ESSER funds to pay for that summer school to the extent not covered by the foundation formula and Prop C revenues. But if you do that, so that's fine if you're using ESSER funds to just pay the portion of your cost on top of how much you get paid through the foundation formula Prop C, and you're able to report all those attendance hours. But if you fully pay for a summer school program with ESSER funds, then you cannot claim those attendance hours for ADA. So you would not submit any hours for a portion of your program fully paid for by ESSER funds. You would report no attendance hours in the August enrollment and attendance file. If you have any questions regarding any reporting of attendance hours, you may call school finance and you may have a discussion with your school finance contact listed on this slide. This concludes the presentation today, and thank you.